Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Tuesday, rounding on the middle of June, almost the longest day of the year. And you know what, Dennis? The longest day of the year for me might be Thursday, the last day before I get to go finally on vacation. First long vacation my wife and I have taken since last June around this time. So looking forward to that. We will also be live with you guys around 9 Eastern on Thursday night, looking at as our second episode before we get a week off. I know I'm looking forward to a week off. It sounded like you were ready for a little bit of a break too.
No, I got to be honest. It's it's that time of the year, and the boys on his second or third sports run, and the Biggins band is touring, and we're doing all kinds of stuff there, and we've had a lot of stuff going on at work with the consultants in and a DOT audit. Everything's gone as good, I think, as you can expect. It's just a lot of stuff going on, and we keep grinding and working at Dynasty Nerds. There's no off season. We do this show all year long because there's diehards out there that want a fantasy football.
Yeah, I feel like the week before you go on vacation is like doubly tiring, not only because you're pressing because you're ready for a break, but also feels like you have to do 2 weeks worth of work.
Well, you're also doing that work that you usually go, oh, well, there's no rush here. I'll get it later.
Now it's a rush, or everybody else, it becomes a rush for them when they realize they only have 2 days with you left in the office. You know who's not rushing to work this week? That would be one Aaron Rodgers, who is skipping mandatory minicamp with what they called an unexcused absence because he has an event he wants to attend. Dennis, the Aaron Rodgers experiment didn't get off to a flying start last year, and with some new pieces and really pushing all their chips in this year, to me, this does not feel like a great impression to make. But what does this strike you as?
Well, if you've been watching Aaron Rodgers for the last 15 or 20 years, he kind of marches to his own drummer, and I'm sure he's off at a campaign event or an ayahuasca event, or just off. Maybe it's darkroom time. I don't know, but I just kind of saw the headline and thought, like, what are they going to do? Fine him some money? And they can't. They've changed the rules, so they can't kind of waive that anymore. But is it really going to make an impact on him?
You get some kind of a fine, though, and for the more you make, the bigger the fine chunk is, because they were talking about Hassan Reddick is not there either because he's holding out for a long-term deal, and they said it was going to cost him $500,000 thereabouts for the 3 days. So
he'll just build it into the contract.
Well, I mean, the only thing I know a lot of times you get veterans missing, like if they're holding out for contracts or things like that. But I think the thing that I would struggle with the most with Rodgers is they didn't have a great year with him coming over, and he really didn't get a chance to play much. They went and got him new parts, and they're trying to get this offense installed, and there's a lot of pressure on the Jets, and I just think it's weird that he couldn't work this out or they couldn't work it out. But I guess we shall see. We'll file it in the same camp probably as Anthony Richardson being held out with shoulder soreness. It's not a great sign, but it's not the end of the world here on June 11th.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about Rodgers. If we're getting into mid-August and he's still, busy,
yeah,
then I'm a little worried. PRP and his Achilles.
Another player who's not reporting to work is Darren Waller. We were pretty sure when we did their preview on Friday that he was going to hang it up because that was all the reports kind of officially came out. So he is retired. I guess first question, how will you remember Waller? And second question, have you had any different thoughts? I think we talked about Bellinger, Theo Johnson, maybe Jack Stoll working in there.
So Waller will be remembered by me as a guy that, had a couple really great years. He had a 2 or 3 year run there where he was the tight end du jour, very productive. He showed how to transition from wide receiver to tight end and make it work. I can relate to him for the struggles that he overcome, having been someone who has had to deal with those types of issues myself. And so I respect that. I respect that he's not just hanging on, trying to collect a paycheck. He feels like it's time to move on to the next part of his life. His heart's not in it, and it could be because of the divorce. It could be, because of the injuries. I think Waller, he's not a Hall of Famer. I don't think anybody needs to have that conversation. I don't think even, he's not a Ring of Fame for the team. I don't think either. Maybe, if you reward somebody, I guess, for having, a couple good years. But I think you recognize that he made some really good contributions, was a good player, and, had a better career than most NFL players.
Well, I think he was a neat story, like you point out. Went through a position change, went through kind of a rock bottom period in his personal life, and you got to admire the way he worked himself back, not only into being in the league, but into, you're right, being one of the premier players at the tight end position for a while there with the Raiders. I had high hopes when he went to the Giants last year. Didn't quite work out. Sounds like there were some injury things that happened that gave him a moment of pause as he thought about continuing his life well beyond football. Sounds like it's been kind of a tumultuous time for him, personally, professionally. So I hope, that he finds something that brings him joy and finds a way to move on. And we'll see what the Giants, I already had the Giants as my number 16 pass catching group. So I don't think this hurts them any more than they were already hurt. Probably puts a lot more pressure on Malik Neighbors.
It might help that group because now there's not, this veteran that they may feel the need to force the ball to.
The only
Bellinger play reasonably well. I like Bellinger over Theo Johnson, at least this year. Now we know their wide receivers are going to have to step up.
Well, and a lot of it's still contingent on what we see from Daniel Jones, or if it's even Daniel Jones. I was kind of shocked when we were looking at the Giants' stats that in the same number of starts, Tommy DeVito had a better completion percentage, yardage, touchdown to interception ratio. That's a little jarring. One guy who is definitely reporting to work is Mike Tomlin, who going into a contract year, they kept saying it was fine, that would get worked out, and indeed it has. He signs a 3-year extension that ties him to the Steelers through 2027. Do you think that there was some thought that maybe starting to be more pressure on Tomlin as the Steelers haven't been able to really do much in the playoffs or be much of a Super Bowl contender? Where do you think a extension like this puts that pressure?
It's the NFL. There's always pressure to win. The Steelers do things differently than most teams. They are extremely patient. And they have a good head coach, good to very good head coach. He's 173 and 102, 173, 100, and 2 ties over the course of his career. He's won a Super Bowl. The vaunted never had a losing record. I don't think I have him scheduled to have a losing record this year either. I don't have him winning the division, but I think if I am, we're going to keep working and see what does Tomlin, what can he do with Russell Wilson? What can he do with Justin Fields? We brought in Arthur Smith. That's going to revamp our offense. We've transitioned to George Pickens as our number one. We drafted Roman Wilson. We traded Deontay Johnson. I think there's change of foot, but it's more of that, so the Steelers do something really good that I'm very bad at in Dynasty. They looked at Deontay Johnson and said, we'd rather be a year early, and they shipped him off. I'm terrible at being a year early because I'm always like, oh, this guy can help me win. And they're like, we think we'll be just fine without him. And
they saw Arthur Smith's offense in Atlanta, and they realized they need receivers.
We only need one guy.
If that. Well, we're continuing our preview tour today. We did the NFC East last week. This week is the AFC East, and we start with the top of the East today. And that means the number one team from 2023, and that was the Buffalo Bills. They finished 11-6, first in the AFC East, lost in the divisional round to the Kansas City Chiefs. Key departures: Stephon Diggs left for Houston via trade. Gabe Davis left for the Jaguars in free agency. Trent Sherfield left for, I believe, the Minnesota Vikings in free agency. 3 receivers out there. Mitch Morse, the center, is gone. Leonard Floyd, the linebacker, went to the 49ers, I believe. Jordan Poyer, the safety, stayed in division, went to the Dolphins. Tre'Davious White, their corner, is gone. Dane Jackson, the other corner, is gone. A lot of salary cap casualties for the Bills, especially on defense. Key additions: they brought in Mitch Trubisky again to be the backup quarterback. He was with Buffalo before he went to the Steelers for a couple of years. Now is back behind Josh Allen. They brought in Curtis Samuel at wide receiver. They brought in Marquez Valdes-Scantling at wide receiver, and they signed Chase Claypool at wide receiver and Mac Hollins at wide receiver. So they brought in some guys. We'll see how much that moves the needle for us. They also brought in La'el Collins at right tackle, formerly of the Cowboys. In the draft, they grabbed Keon Coleman, a wide receiver from Florida State. They got Ray Davis, a running back, and they picked up Frank Gore Jr., another running back, as an undrafted free agent. In 2023, quarterback Josh Allen was QB1 overall. James Cook, their leading running back, was running back 12 overall. They really shifted to a run-heavy offense in the second half of the season, which sparked the team, which at one point I believe was 7-6 and on the verge of washing out of the playoffs, and they ended up winning their last 4 and actually winning the division, largely in part to those two. Stephon Diggs finished as wide receiver 9, but we marked before he was pretty good at the beginning of the season and pretty dreadful down the stretch for fantasy perspective. Gabe Davis, wide receiver 41. Khalil Shakir, who is still there, was wide receiver 61. Samuel, who they brought in, wide receiver 42 for the Commanders. So Samuel, Shakir, probably the 2 biggest veterans at that room. Their best passing game weapon down the stretch was Dalton Kincaid. The rookie tight end finished as tight end 11, while his running mate Dawson Knox, who missed some games, finished as tight end 41. Dennis, wide receiver room, will charitably call it a work in progress. That didn't really matter that much to Josh Allen and James Cook and Dalton Kincaid last year. I don't think it's going to matter that much to them in 2024.
It's a room full of guys, that's for sure. I mean, I don't know. I think that the expectation is that Keon Coleman is going to need to do some Kelvin Benjamin type stuff in the early Benjamin career before he got beefed up. Curtis Samuel has always been a guy that seems to just not quite be able to put it all together. I think he's 28 now. And as much as I'm pulling for Samuel, I just don't feel like he's a guy I want to have to rely on. And his skill set seems very similar to Khalil Shakir. Then they've got the outside guys, MVS and Mac Hollins. Those guys will end up just sort of, and even Chase Claypool, one of those three will end up being a starter on the outside. But I don't have any hopes that any of them will be as productive as Gabe Davis was. So for me, the question comes down to where does the Stephon Diggs production come from? And all signs seem to point at Dalton Kincaid. Now, I think for that to happen,
Diggs didn't even really have production down the stretch.
Well, the second half
they're not replacing much.
I mean, he had 107 receptions. They were a lot of short ones last year. So it ends up, I think we're going to see a lot more 12 personnel out of them, which will put Kincaid out receiving. Where's Knox? Knox played 12 games, only had 36 targets. I would expect a bump in that. Kincaid had 91 targets, and so I would expect a little bump there. It comes down to how are they going to distribute Diggs's 160 targets? Gabe Davis had 81. That feels, I guess, rightish for Curtis Samuel. Maybe a little more, maybe 10 more. But I think Kincaid's going to lead him in targets. James Cook had 54 targets. There's a lot of talk about Ray Davis being the hammer back, but Davis, he's not that big a guy. He's 5'8", but he's 208, I think. So he does have some power, but he's also a very good wide receiver. Several years ago when we had him on the show, one of the things he touted was his ability to be an asset in all three facets of the game. And I think over his career, that is panned out. I expect it to be more of a Travis Kelce-ish distribution of offense. But then James Cook had almost 1,600 total yards last year. If he can get his touchdowns up from 6 to double digits, Cook takes a big jump, but I'm just not sure at 195 pounds, he's a guy I want carrying the ball 237 times. So I think he probably drops down to 175. Ray Davis and Ty Johnson will pick up the slack on the ground. But I could see Cook's targets going up 15, get him up to 70, 75 maybe even.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I went to go look. So Stephon Diggs, his target share remains pretty good. He had no games where he had fewer than 5 targets. But after week 9, he only had one game where he only had 2 games where he had 70 or more passing yards. A lot of those games, the rest of them were actually all sub 50. So I put that up against Kincaid, wondering, well, maybe a lot of it. But that actually isn't a hot stretch for Kincaid either. So part of me now is sort of wanting, in Kincaid, week 10, he had 5 for 51. He had 6 for and a touchdown, 6 for 46 in week 11, but then 5 for 38, 5 for 21, didn't record a single catch in week 14, 1 for 7, then 4 for 87, 7 for 84. I think he's still going to be a big weapon, but I'm starting to lean toward, I feel like Buffalo found something with Cook, and you're right, he put up some great rushing numbers. He was a good passing game weapon too. I expect him to put up a running back 1 season again. I think he's tracking toward that. They really like Ty Johnson. I wouldn't be surprised if Ty Johnson's some of the hammer back. I'm curious to see how they deploy Ray Davis. I like his potential there, but I mean, they liked and used Ty Johnson last year, and they re-signed him. So I think we can't too quickly count him out. But among receivers, Honestly, would you be surprised if the Bills don't have a wide receiver that lands in the top 40? Because I'm honestly thinking they could have 2 or 3 guys that are somewhere between like 41 and 70.
I think that's where they're headed. I don't want any of them any higher than my wide receiver 4.
Yeah, I'm still leaning towards Shakir because I feel like he's the potentially best value because I don't know about you, but in rookie drafts, I've seen Keon Coleman going, right around wide receiver 6 or 7 in the draft. I think there's a lot of thought that people think he's going to step right in and be Stephon Diggs. I think he would probably be lucky if he stepped right in and was Gabe Davis. But I'm looking, so Shakir, week 11, 3 for 115 and a touchdown. He had 3 for 47 the following week. Apparently no one did anything in that game against Dallas, probably because they beat them 31-10, and I think they ran the crap out.
Did you say Coleman around 6 or 7, or is wide receiver 6?
Wide receiver 6 or 7.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, not. But I've seen him. Sometimes I see him go right before Brian Thomas. But usually you have the big 3. Worthy goes somewhere in there. McConkey, Thomas, and Keon Coleman. That seems to be that next level. I've seen people reach and go with Coleman as high as wide receiver 5 in the draft. Yeah, definitely not 6 or 7 in the draft, unless you're a true Keon Coleman believer. But Khalil Shakir had 2 games over 100 yards receiving after week 10. Didn't catch a ton of passes, but seemed to be pretty productive with what he did catch. And I like him. I like his potential. Curtis Samuel, though, is another guy who's been pretty consistent the last few years. If you take away 2021, where he suffered a major injury and got knocked out, pretty much missed that season. 2022 saw 92 targets, caught 64 for 656, 4 touchdowns. Last year saw 91 targets, caught 62 for 613 and 4 touchdowns. He usually always gets a small group of carries. In 2022, Washington handed the ball off to him 38 times. He carried it 41 times in 2020, his last year with Carolina. Didn't carry the ball as much last year, but kind of a gadget player. I think he'll be low end wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 territory, kind of like always. Shakir, though, probably could be in that wide receiver 4. I just, Gabe Davis, wide receiver, was 41 last year. Shakir was 61. I don't think they have a receiver that finishes in the top 30. I'm not sold they have one that breaks the top 40.
So let me ask you this. Would you rather have Gabe Davis or any of the Bills wide receivers this year?
I'd probably take Curtis Samuel, honestly. I think Gabe Davis is a real hit or miss guy going to a team where I don't see how his situation improved going to Jacksonville. It may have gotten worse because they have a very established tight end. Evan Ingram was tight end 2 last year, and they already have their target hog possession receiver in Christian Kirk. They also added a dynamic rookie in Brian Thomas. I think Gabe Davis is easily, to me, the 4th passing game option, maybe the 5th passing game option if they get ATN going. Curtis Samuel, because there's a vacuum and because he's been relatively consistent. It depends on whether it ends up being him or Shakir that seizes kind of that role. But we've seen Josh Allen do well with those kind of receivers. I mean, remember Cole Beasley there lit it up for the Bills for a couple of years doing that same kind of thing. But I mean, do you feel more optimistic about Gabe Davis in his new location?
I feel like Gabe Davis. So Ridley's gone, and Kirk is back. Who was the third guy?
Zay Jones is
gone. So I think Gabe is the wide receiver 2 there. I
think Brian Thomas is the wide receiver 2.
I think Thomas is gonna have to earn it.
Gabe Davis is going to have to earn it. I mean, if Gabe Davis was returning to a team that he had been on, like if he would have returned to Buffalo, I probably would feel better about him because he's been in the system, been there for a while.
It's going to be touch and go. That's for sure.
I mean, it'd be exciting.
I mean,
I actually have,
Davis is.
Yeah, he's the one that puts up incredible games when you have him on your bench and makes you want to cry when you finally decide to start him. So the Bills, 11-6 last year, won the East. How are you feeling about them in 2024?
Oddly enough, I have them checking back in at 11-6 and second in the division.
Yep, I had them in the exact same place, 11-6. I think 10-11 wins. I actually think that they, provided Rodgers is back to what we thought he was going to be when he originally went over to the Jets. I think there's potential for three pretty decent teams, possibly three playoff teams out of the AFC East.
I do have them with only the third best record in their division, though.
Yeah. Okay, so the second team we're going to look at out of the East today is the Miami Dolphins. 2023, they finished 11-6. Also lost the tiebreaker to finish second in the AFC East. They were really, really strong at the beginning of the season and sort of faded down the stretch. Kind of went inverse of the Bills, which ended up costing them the division, and that put them on the road in the wild card at the Chiefs in what was one of the coldest games of the year. They, of course, lost that wild card game to the Chiefs. So the Chiefs were kind of the scourge of the AFC East in the playoffs last year. Both of these teams lost to them. Key departures, using that word key loosely in some cases. Cedric Wilson, the receiver, left. He went to the Saints. Chase Claypool, as we mentioned, is now with the Buffalo Bills. I doubt the Dolphins are going to miss him that much. Christian Wilkins, defensive tackle, moved on. Brandon Jones, their safety, now with the Denver Broncos. Jerome Baker, a good pass rusher at outside linebacker, is also gone. Key additions, they brought in Odell Beckham Jr. at wide receiver, gives them kind of an interesting number 3 receiver. Jonnu Smith, a little bit of an upgrade at tight end. They went and snagged Jordan Poyer, the great safety from the Bills, to kind of anchor their safety room. And they signed Shaq Barrett, a good pass rusher from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In the draft, they went and grabbed Chop Robinson, a pass rusher, outside linebacker. That was a big problem for the Dolphins down the stretch, as a lot of their key defenders and pass rushers kept getting injured. So it's kind of an area of focus for them. They grabbed Patrick Paul, an offensive tackle, to kind of beef up the line, and they grabbed another speedy running back in Jalen Wright. Fantasy finishes a year ago: Tua Tagovailoa, QB9. Raheem Mostert was running back 5. Devon Achane was running back 24. Probably would have finished higher if he would have been available for more games. Had a huge points per game average. Wide receivers: Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 2. Jalen Waddle missed a few games, ended up as wide receiver 34. Turam Smythe was their best tight end last year at tight end 34. Dennis, it's pretty much about the stable of running backs and those top 2 receivers. Any spark interesting you out of Jonnu Smith, who we saw have a pretty decent run for the Falcons last year?
It feels a lot like the Dolphins use tight ends like the Patriots use Jonnu Smith. And so I'm nervous. Jonnu he's much better than Durham Smythe. I'll give him that. I just think that will he be able to consistently have an opportunity to make plays? He could be a sleeper. I mean, they don't really have much in the way of third wide receiver. I like the running back room in Miami with Mostert and Achane and now Jalen Wright, and they still have Jeff Wilson, Salvon Ahmed, Chris Brooks is coming back. So they've got a really strong running back room. And then Tua, no, they lost Robert Hunt at guard. They drafted Patrick Paul, who's a tackle. The offensive line will need to stay stable, but losing Van Ginkel, losing Jerome Baker, Christian Wilkins, those are big losses for that defense. So that offense may very well have to put up a lot of points to be as productive as they were last year. I like the offense. The offense is so explosive. It's up there with some of the best offenses we've seen in the last few years. If they stay healthy with Waddle and Tyreek Hill and Raheem Mostert, Devin Achane, Tua, that offense could really be a fantasy bonanza. So I'm fortunate, much like you, I have lots of fantasy teams. So I'm going to get pieces of just about all of these guys. And so I'll have exposure and it'll be fun. I don't have to worry too much about investing unreasonable amounts or getting too top heavy on the team. I mean, if I was going to roster 2 wide receivers from the same team, I think I'm okay rostering Hill and Waddle. I mean,
or the duo from the Eagles.
Yeah.
A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith.
There are a couple duos out there that you're good. Even Chase and Higgins. I think I'm good rostering both of those. So
Debo.
Yeah, I'm less good about those because they just, I don't know, that one troubles me a little more. So I love the fantasy assets, the top 5 fantasy assets, and then from a dynasty perspective, getting Jalen Wright is huge. If I have Mostert, grabbing Wright as the successor, it looks tailor-made. They're almost the same guy. Just one of them is 10 years younger.
Well, and remember this time last year, I feel like we thought Jeff Wilson was going to do what Raheem Mostert ended up doing last year. Now, it's possible Wilson doesn't even make the final roster.
It is possible. Now, Wilson isn't as fast as Mostert, but he's effective in that offense. I just finished up one of my rookie drafts, and I grabbed Jalen Wright at the 205. I was fortunate. I had a bad team, so I had several early round picks. I had the 2 and the 3, and I was hoping beyond hope that because I drafted Anthony Richardson last year, that the 101 didn't get squirrely and take Marvin Harrison. And because to be fair, he did not need a quarterback. So he traded the 101 to a guy who needed a quarterback, who took Caleb Williams. And I got Marvin at 2 and Jaden Daniels at 3. And then I was hoping Jonathan Brooks would fall to 10, which was my next first-round pick. And I was debating, should I try to move up to 9? And then he got drafted at the 106. So I thought 106.
In Superflex?
Yeah.
Oof.
106 I thought was pretty high for Jonathan Brooks. But I guess get your guy. So then I was debating how I was going to play the 110. I tried to trade it in a deal to get Mark Andrews because I was weak at tight end. That didn't work. And lo and behold, out of the blue, I received an offer of Jonathan Taylor in the 408 for the 110.
Wow.
So I went and looked to see, was I missing something? Because it's an industry person, highly regarded, and I'm like, they're really overpaying for the 110. I didn't see any negative Jonathan Taylor news, so I smash accepted, and I got to be honest, I'll take Jonathan Taylor over Jonathan Brooks right now. So,
yeah, and 106, that is pretty early. Even in single QB leagues, I don't know if I've seen him go quite. I mean, I guess I've seen him go higher, but
yeah. But this draft, I got Harrison at 2, Daniels at 3, traded the 110 for Jonathan Taylor, Ladd McConkey at 202, Jalen Wright at 205, Roman Wilson at 206. Luke McCaffrey at 210, then 3rd and 4th round, Spencer Rattler, Cade Stover, Jalen McMillan, some 3rd and 4th round guys. So,
and then McMillan though has a chance to be the kind of number 3 there in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, well, McMillan and Trey Palmer both kind of have opportunities to be the successors to Evans and Godwin.
So going back to the Dolphins, I did look it up. OBJ was wide receiver 63 for the Ravens last year. I think if you're rostering him, it's probably for by Mageddon weeks, or if in case maybe one of the top two goes down. I don't think he's at this stage like a real consistent producer. I'm not even 100% sold even in a good landing spot. He has to be rostered. Smith was tight end 17 last year. They've talked about wanting to get the tight end more involved. I mean, in theory, that sounds good to me, but I just don't believe it. Kind of like what you said, they have not given any indication the tight end is relevant. I mean, they had Mike Gesicki on a franchise tag a couple of years ago, and he got nothing. So, I mean, if Smith is my second or third tight end on the roster, I don't mind holding him. But if you picked him up thinking that you're going to roll into a relevant starter, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, Smith is he's a lottery ticket. Maybe he pans out and you luck into it, and if you've got a Freiermuth or a Jelani Woods or one of these late TE1s, early TE2s, Smith may be a guy that outplays them, but he may be inconsistent as well. So
you're a lot more bullish on Jelani Woods than I am too, apparently.
Well, I'm a Will Mallory guy, but it seems like Woods is their guy.
I know. I just don't. The Colts is another team. I'm not thinking the tight end is probably a good bet for me. So Dolphins were 11-6 last year. For a lot of last year, they kind of were dominating that division. Really faded a little bit due to a lot of defensive injuries. They were also, much like the Cowboys, a team that just beat the tar out of bad teams and really struggled against good teams. They've put a lot of emphasis on trying to snap that 24-year playoff victory drought and trying to make a move. Very competitive division. How are you feeling about the Dolphins?
So I am bullish on the Dolphins because of their offense. I think they're, getting Jalen Phillips back is going to be good. Chop Robinson hopefully is able to step in. Deshaun Hand, who they signed as a free agent. Let's see what happens with Jordan Brooks, who they brought over from Seattle, and Jordan Poyer, who came over from Buffalo. So they've got some players on defense. And I think that, playing in the NFL is a learning experience. And last year, they learned they could beat bad teams, and they learned that they had to learn how to beat good teams. And I feel like Mike McDaniel has spent all offseason preaching that mantra about, all right, what did we learn last year? We learned that we can beat bad teams, and we got to learn how to beat good teams this year. What are we going to do? How are you, and he's in everybody's ear. How are you going to help us beat good teams this year? And I think they're going to come out. I've got them at 13-4, I think it is. Does that add up? Yeah. 13-4. And just 5-1 in the division. Probably one win too many.
I had them at 11-6, but I have them winning the division and making the playoffs. I just think they're that group at the top. Ironically for me, we'll talk about when we go through the AFC. I have all 7 playoff teams in the AFC with at least 11 wins. And I don't know if that ends up bearing out, but, they're very top. The AFC East and the AFC North, I think, could have, 7 teams over 500. That's the way it feels for me. I'm not as bullish on the Patriots, not to give things away for Thursday, but I think those teams are very stacked. The AFC West feels a little weak behind the Chiefs, and the AFC South feels like more of a toss-up. But the East has 3 pretty good teams up at the top, and I think the Dolphins, Bills, Jets, that's going to be an interesting trio to watch. That'll do it for the top half of the AFC East. We'll be back to talk more Jets. Unlike Aaron Rodgers, we will show up to talk Jets, and we will do that on Thursday a little bit later.
We'll see. I may phone it in and take that fine.
sadly take a look at the Patriots as well. But reminder, we will be going live Thursday around 9 Eastern for that second show, and then we will be off, taking a little break the following week. But Dennis, if people need something for the rest of this week, or if they want to prepare for that long summer snap where we take a week off, what can they do?
You need to head on over to your favorite podcast platform, hit that search button, search for the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, leave us a rating. It's easy for me to say.
I mean, they can rebate us. I don't know what that is, but it sounds about right.
I'm a trendsetter, man.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds about right. Well, that'll do it for us this week. Whatever important errand that Aaron Rodgers is doing, we wish him well. And until Thursday, you guys have a wonderful week.